Welcome, everyone. My name is Raghav. I'm the host for today's session. So, the Debate Club is a community that has been operational since November last year, and we are basically a community of people who are eager to have like nuanced intellectual conversations. It's called the Debate Club, but a lot of the times we also engage in just conversations and discussions and things like that. So every week on Saturday at 11 a.m. IST, we have these weekly debate sessions where we have like topics that have been member submitted. So we have a website where anybody can submit a topic, and every week we have one of the topics that was previously submitted and curated, and we have a poll where people list the topics that vote for the topics that the members have submitted, and then we select them and we schedule these calls. um, so every week, Saturday 11 a.m. we have these debates, and then at on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. we have brainstorming sessions, which are more focused on just getting together to have a conversation towards an actionable outcome rather than just exchanging views and having debates and things. So we try to have for the weekly debates, we try to have controversial topics that have like a split, in terms of something that's polarizing. And sometimes it's not always the case that it's polarizing, but still there is room for substantial, intellectually nuanced conversations. So we try to facilitate that. The primary reason why the debate club was set up was because there is a void in terms of space for Indian citizens to go and have like nuanced conversations. A lot of the times it's mostly just sensationalized perspectives that are shared, and it's also always like one way. Either you're watching it on a YouTube video or you're watching it on NDTV or news channels, and it's like you're consuming but not participating. So the reason why we set this up is so that like we can have like a bi-directional conversation with like-minded people, or even the people on the other side of the aisle. Like when we have like controversial topics, only when we have like nuanced conversations we actually get to learn the other perspective. Otherwise you're just going to stick to echo chambers. So we try to, like, even though we are having controversial topics and nuanced conversations, we try to make sure that there is like civil discourse where everybody is respected, and even though you disagree with somebody, you still have engaged in a respectful conversation rather than just like engage in mudslinging or name calling. So that is the premise behind the community. Now, coming to today's topic, the topic for today's session is freedom of speech can lead to hate speech, agree or disagree. So every week we have this like claim statement, and then we ask whether it's you agree or disagree. So the claim statement for today is like freedom of speech can lead to hate speech. Now, this is a very interesting topic with a lot of like noise around it. The recent past few years, especially globally, not just in here, but globally. I mean, especially in the US, this has been a thing that's going on where there is a perception that there is a freedom of speech is being attacked by various institutions and various individuals, where there is excessive, you know, attempt to control free speech in the fear that you're going to offend somebody. So there is this like heightened fear of offending other people, and you guys have seen how things happen in terms of like getting canceled for saying something. People are walking on eggshells these days, like as to like what as to how people are going to respond to what they genuinely feel like. So they kind of like sugarcoat it, or they kind of like withhold themselves from speaking the mind. So on the one hand, there are people who are advocates of free speech, people who passionately believe that you have to be able to speak freely, otherwise it's a restrictive environment, and it's not honoring the values of democracy. And on the other hand, like there are people who observe that people who speak freely, people who propagate hate speech, are inciting violence on the ground. Even if you say something on Twitter, it has like echoes and ripples on the ground, which are not conducive for a peaceful environment. There are a lot of things have happened, especially in India, where somebody says something and then there is like a backlash on the ground by people who are emotionally like charged by the words that were spoken. And also there have been cases where people spread certain rumors and then somebody gets killed. These things happen, especially in India. I think in India especially, we have this environment where people are very emotionally, they're very emotionally volatile. So this is the context. We're having a fight between, do we allow everybody to speak freely and nothing, there's no restrictions, or do we have do we have some certain measures against free speech, so that like we can prevent the negative consequences of hate speech? So how this is going to work is that, now that I've set the context, I hope everybody's on the same page. So how this is going to work is that you will raise your hand. So there is a, on the bottom you see a react button. If you click on that, there is an option to raise your hand. So if you want to raise, if you want to speak, you have to raise your hand to get into the queue, and you'll each have 5 minutes to speak. And after, I'll run a timer so that like everybody is on the timer, and then once somebody is done, the next person goes. That's how it is. So I see that Prince, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Raghav. Great topic nonetheless. Uh, uh, Before even stating my personal opinions, I'd like to go back to the constitutional provisions that kind of protects our freedom of speech. That is Article 19(1)(a). And I know this is going to come up several times in this discussion, that we have freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a). But people often forget that there is Article 19 Clause 2 as well, where the government has imposed reasonable restrictions on the right to freedom of speech and expression. And the reasons for such restrictions are in the interest of security of the nation, sovereignty, public order, blah, blah, blah. There are like 8 or 9 such cases, and one of which kind of relates to hate speech. And the exact words are defamation or incitement to an offense. So, as much as I may be a proponent of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, the the forefathers of our constitution has kind of gave us very little to play with, because they themselves have imposed certain clauses where the restrictions are based on morality or decency, which are very vague terms, and these kind of these kind of clauses kind of restrict our freedom of speech. And this is of course in fear that if we provide absolute freedom to the citizens, then there might be uh, some intentional incitement of offense, or intentional calls for uh, calls for some not very peaceful and non-violent measures. So I guess this is the place where the government kind of plays with how we work and how we think, by just putting forth a debate that whether there should be freedom of speech or liberty of speech. So, and coming to my opinion, I do believe that there should be freedom of speech, and in any civil society, people are gonna kind of balance their speech and action in such a way that it is not inciting any offense to any specific person or group of people, just because they have got the opportunity to do so. And uh, especially with IPC section 295 and all, I don't think we need much any more restrictions than we already have on freedom of speech to kind of restrict hate speech. Yeah, Raghav.
Okay, so just to clarify, what is the difference between freedom of speech and liberty of speech?
So the basic difference between freedom and liberty is freedom is absolute freedom without any restrictions. And when you kind of talk about liberty, then it is absolute freedom, but under the constraints of the law of the land.
Okay, so basically you're agreeing with the statement saying that freedom of speech can lead to hate speech. That is your summary, and you've stated that the Constitution does recognize that and has provisions for it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thanks, thanks, Prince. So next is Samarth. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Raghav. Before I put forth my views on this particular topic now, I wanted to, discuss a little bit about the framing of the topic itself. The debate topic, it is stated as free speech can lead to hate speech, agree or disagree. So, obviously, in some instances, at least, it undeniably does. So when that is the case, I think this framing of the debate topic, it could have been better, because I think even the supporters of the free speech, they would argue that in at least some cases, the freedom of speech, it does lead to hate speech. So I think this debate topic, it could have been, some more words could have been added, and it could have been made more logical and concise. What do you say about this one?
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe the focus is on what is the consequence of hate speech and should it be avoided, because it is obvious that freedom of speech, when you have freedom of speech, somebody is going to use it to express hate, because people do have genuine hate in their minds. So maybe the emphasis could be on, like, do we need to have um, provision for hate speech? Should hate speech be allowed? That is how I see it. Because I think, yeah, you're right that I think the topic could be better. This was just like submitted by somebody, and yeah, I think that maybe the focus could be on, like, is hate speech detrimental? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I got what you're saying, Raghav. And yeah, we can have a discussion based on that emphasis, whether yeah, the free speech, at least in some cases, it will inevitably lead to hate speech. But if you curb that hate speech, yeah, so the pros and cons of curbing that kind of hate speech. Yeah, so we can have a discussion on that one. Uh, I will start by clarifying what this free speech entails and what it does not, because even this definition of free speech, it varies a lot from country to country. And arguably, in the entire world, arguably the country which has the most safeguards for free speech, I think it is USA, where they have very limited restrictions on free speech, and most of the speech that goes on, it is considered legal. So even over there, the most freest country in terms of free speech, even in the USA, many of speech, it is considered illegal and not considered under free speech. So, for example, false advertising is considered as illegal and not considered under free speech over there. So, if I'm going to claim a product does some function, and when in reality it does none of that sort, and if I advertise that the product uh, for the sake of selling that one, that will be considered as a false advertising, and I will be liable to prosecution. And such a kind of speech, it is not actually considered as a free speech, and it is considered as illegal. Yeah, so free speech definitely does not include that one. But what it does include, yeah, I'm speaking only about USA right now. What it does include is hate speech, and that hate speech, it does include a speech that is considered as disparaging or yeah, disparaging towards an individual or any social group, a speech that is considered that is prejudicial or disparaging towards a group, that is definitely covered under free speech. So now the pros and cons of having that free speech, the safeguard of the free speech. Yeah, I would like to get into that one, but since I'm nearly out of time, maybe I'll get into that one later. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Samarth. Yeah, next is Jayesh. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hello. So I am against the freedom of speech, and I'll explain it why. Because it varies I mean, I have two examples of it. The first one is you take, I think you all know about Umar Khalid. He was a student of JNU. He invoked the violence of Delhi riots. And right now he's in Tihar jail under UAPA. He invoked violent speeches against India, and yeah, because of which riots happen. So I think freedom of speech should be not literally give everyone the freedom to speak whatever they want, however they want. It should be carved curbed down between some rules, which I guess our constitution has provided, and I guess Mr. Prince spoke that liberty of speech part of it, and I think uh, freedom should not be entirely given. Like in USA, you can speak whatever you want, however you want, and we are seeing the instances in Canada and their support to the Khalistanis as well. They're not they're not letting them. Sorry, they are not. Uh, they are not curbing the terrorism against and the violent hate speech against India. They're instead supporting them and letting them whatever they want to do. So, yeah, that's what I want to say. Thank you. I
Okay.
know I'm new to this, so sorry for this. I'm not
No
properly.
worries, no worries. Yeah, you're good, man. Um, okay. So you're saying that it's sometimes, like, freedom of speech can lead to detrimental consequences. So we should prevent people from saying whatever they want. But these restrictions do apply in the US. It's not like in the US anything will imply. Like Samarth was saying, there are certain restrictions even on free speech. So, for example, like I think even so, for example, there is something called fighting words. Like if you speak something that is inciting a fight in the US, that is actually prohibited. That's excluded from free speech. This is maybe I may be wrong, but correct me if somebody knows that I'm wrong. But I am aware that it's there are some restrictions like false advertisement, fighting words, and there are also like hate crimes. Hate speech is actually like allowed, but hate crimes are not, because like speaking is something and then actually acting on it is something else. So yeah, it's a nuanced position. I think who is next? So Samarth, you're next, but Ruhi has raised the hand. I just want to allow the new people to speak. So Ruhi, you can go next.
Yeah, so freedom of speech. If, for example, who gets to control freedom of speech also matters because they can use it to fulfill their agenda. That also kind of implies that there is no freedom of speech. That's what I wanted to add in a way. As long as you don't offend them.
What do you
Yeah,
mean by
that's what
who controls freedom of speech?
I mean. For example, the government. Uh,
No, see, when you say control freedom of speech, right? Like there are laws, of course, and there is a process for establishing these laws, and those laws apply to everybody. It's not like somebody is exempt from these laws, and it's not like somebody can choose suddenly to not apply those laws in certain cases. So the whole purpose of these laws to exist is that you're creating a reasonable framework for everybody to act in. It's not like somebody has an exemption or immunity from these laws. So I'm not really clear on what exactly you're saying here.
Actually, in case of Twitter, when Elon Musk took over, when he started supporting the Republicans, he pulled a lot of files or a lot of news channels or reporters. He banned a lot of reporters in order to make it easier for the Republican Party to have a bigger hand on, like, have a winning hand on elections, like that.
Okay. Hold on. Sorry, I think I forgot to turn off the timer. But one of the things is that what you're saying, right? Like this is like a private control. Like Twitter is a private platform, and somebody has control of it because they are the owner of it. And them, configuring the platform in such a way that they allow whatever they think is the best for the platform to happen. It's not a governmental thing. It's like completely a private issue. So I don't know if that is considered like a that is the same as like somebody controlling free speech. It's to a certain extent, yes, but it does not apply to the entire nation or anything. It's just a control of a private entity, and because it's a very popular entity, yes, it warrants social conversation. But I don't think it really does anything to if it does, if it does turn out that a lot of people feel like Twitter is being unfair, then they will leave the platform and it would basically go down. So there is a nuanced position there. Like it's not the same as like the government controlling this. And if the government does, then that is a bigger issue.
And I think government did for a while too. I mean, when Elon Musk took over, he kind of outed a lot of files saying that, when Jack Dorsey was controlling Twitter, there were a lot of moderations that they had to make, even though they didn't want to, but it was forced by the FBI or the government directly.
No, okay. So
And
I think we're deviating from the topic of conversation now. It's about like is we like Samarth was saying that there is a subtle distinction in this topic. So it's not about like freedom of speech leads to hate speech. It's more like is hate speech detrimental? I think we should maybe like bring down the focus of the conversation to that. And from that perspective, Ruhi, maybe you can say like how that relates to the situation that you're talking about with Twitter. You think that hate speech on Twitter is should be allowed or should be like prevented?
I mean, hate speech should be prevented if it has any detrimental consequences. But you should also be mindful of the fact that the controlling of hate speech should not be misused. If it's misused, it's as equal to not allowing freedom of speech.
Okay. Is that all from you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think the next person is Samarth. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you brought up a very good question, Raghav, about in a US example, what kind of speech, is actually like prohibited and not considered and not protected under this free speech. So like if someone over there, they actually speak something which causes like a riot, so that it is under a very gray category, and probably that person will be liable to be prosecuted. So when the courts over there, they have actually uh, uh, conducted these cases, they have set up some definition, and they set up this definition of something called imminent violence. So what it says is like if a speech that leads to if there is some imminent violence content that is conducted that is contained in a speech, so that will be considered as illegal and not be covered under free speech. So for example, if let's say there is a person living in a neighborhood, and what he wants to do is like he just announces on social media that he's going to start shooting other people in his neighborhood who belong to some other racial group. If he actually says like that, that is termed as as calls for imminent violence. So then he will be like prosecuted. But if that same person he says, the people belong to some other racial group, they are basically animals, and their rights should be taken away, that person, he will be, he won't be liable for prosecution, because it is deemed that what he is saying, although hateful, it is not calling for imminent violence. Yeah. So that is how they prosecute cases over there. But recently, there have been pushback against such an interpretation of imminent violence. where the people doing the pushback, they are saying this person who is actually calling for rights to be stripped, the rights to be stripped from a group of people, although his action, although his speech, it does not have a consequence in the immediate time. No, it will have consequences. His speech can lead to consequences in some later time frame. His speech can contribute towards creating a climate of violence and intimidation that will cause practical violence in some later time frame, is what they're saying, and that is why his speech is to be restricted, is the argument being done. So again, this becomes like a very contentious when we speak of any speech being done by a person which does not do imminent violence, but it contains speech that might cause violence at a later time. How do we exactly come to know which kind of speech will lead to violence at a later time? That is something that cannot be, simply calculated or computed. If I say, for example, that we have people from a certain religion, and people from that religion, some people from that religion are behaving badly, and they take inspiration for their bad behavior from their interpretation of some passages in the scripture. Obviously, I'm not calling for any imminent violence to be done against any sort of person over here. But how will my speech be interpreted in this case? Will my speech, will it lead to a creation of an atmosphere in some later time which can cause violence against the people that I'm speaking against right now? So that is like very hard to compute. I think this is like an intractable problem itself, like to say this kind of speech will lead to violence in some later kind of in some later time. That is nearly impossible to say, and that is where the crux of the argument is, I feel.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll end my talk. Thank you.
That's a great point. I think one of the things is that you have to understand that there are consequences to the framing of these laws, or the public perception even of like what is allowed, what should be allowed, what should not be allowed. Because imagine if somebody placed a restriction leaning very much to one side, where they're saying that because your speech is going to be detrimental down the line, like Samat was saying, though therefore your speech is prohibited, or let's say that there are like punitive measures to discourage you from engaging in that kind of speech. Now on the other hand, now you're creating an environment where people have things to say, but they feel restricted from saying those things because it can be perceived as being detrimental down the line, or whatever. And you can actually argue that that is actually the case in India, especially. You've seen a lot of the cases where like somebody said something and a lot of people get offended, and they file cases and all these things. Especially like in India, like people are very emotionally sensitive, and there have been cases where like movies have been like banned or things like that because of some kind of a content that is controversial or like hurting the sentiments of people. In India, especially, it's not as liberal as the US, where people it doesn't have to incite imminent violence or imminent crimes or anything, but still it can get a legal blowback because it can be offensive to somebody. So that really limits expression, and unless you have free expression, you cannot like evolve the narrative. You cannot like engage in, I mean, for example, what we're doing here, this constitutes like a like evolution of the narrative, because we are engaging in these things. So that's a very good point, Samat. Thanks for sharing that. Next up we have Rishi. Go ahead. Rishi, you're on mute.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I was talking on mute. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy weekend. Am I audible?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, what I see, freedom of expression is right for everybody. regardless of race, gender, anything. But hate speech is more of a civic sense. I feel it's more of a moral sense. Like, why do you even have to give a hate speech at first point? It becomes challenge when you are trying to kind of motivate others for your strategy or your propaganda or whatever. And it's just that I feel government or whoever the civic body is needs to be very centristic and find a solution to take strict action on both kind of like either side. That's what I feel. We cannot stop hate speech, that for sure, because it has a catalyst called politics and religion. So we can't stop that. It's that we can try to minimize it. It can only be stopped from people's own senses. Like, if you love everybody, hate speech will never come at first place. I don't know if does this make sense or not, but that's what I feel.
Yeah, so I think the question of like whether nobody is like going out there to like expressly like say something just to hate somebody. Maybe there are instances where you could be saying something that is perceived as hate speech. Maybe you're not expressing your hatred, but the other person who's listening to you may feel offended, and they can consider it hate speech. That is a very tricky situation, because maybe you're making a really nuanced point. Maybe you're saying that so that is where the gray area is, and the definitions of like hate speech can get like really murky, because you may not want to be perceived as hate speech, but inevitably that could be the case, right?
Exactly, makes sense.
Okay, do you have anything else to say?
No, that's
okay. Fine. All right. Next we have Guru Vignesh. Please go ahead.
So before I start, hello everyone. And yeah, so most of the points I wanted to talk are already covered, but still I would, speak out of my mind. So the first thing, hate speech is definitely detrimental, and why do people do hate speech? Sometimes, it is motivated by individuals or group of individuals. I mean, by a group or individuals, and for their own benefit or for their political benefit, and that is definitely detrimental. And one point what I wanted to cover is sometimes whatever I speak, the words are twisted, and that is one thing. And then the next thing is perceptions matter, right? So what I speak and may not be perceived in the same way by another person, right? So in such cases, even if I'm telling something, the other one may not take it in the same way, and they may get offended, and they would start developing hate. And for such cases, just because I said the right thing, that cannot be classified as hate speech, right? And this really becomes fuzzy, where to classify whether something is hate speech or a normal one, right? Because sometimes people get offended, for telling facts as well, right? So if I tell a fact, and then that really hurts somebody, and then that set of people start developing hatred towards the other set of people, right? So yeah, so that actually in a way is not in my opinion. So that means that, because if it offended somebody, I cannot tell a fact, right? That means that it is actually infringing my freedom of speech also.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also one more thing is that sometimes we have to actually wonder, is hate speech so much worse than somebody holding that hatred within, and then creating a closed group where that hatred is like freely expressed, but not publicly. So you have this underground community of people who have this like heightened hatred, and that is actually a much more detrimental thing than somebody saying something out in the open. If you create an environment for people to speak freely in the public, then these feelings of hatred can dissipate easily. instead
Yeah.
of like festering and like increasing and getting worse. And
Yeah.
the moment you create like an environment where there is like excessive control over speech, and there is like, top down control over the speech, then people feel the need to go and that hate will fester, and then they'll go and create an environment where they can freely express that, and that'll
Yeah.
create an alternate society within alternate subcultures within the society, which can engage in hate crimes. So they're no longer interested in just speaking. They will go ahead and enforce their narrative by committing crimes. And if they're smart enough, they could even go undetected, or they could end up like becoming a terrorist group. Like, for example, the Khalistani group is there.
Yeah.
They have extreme amounts of hatred towards Hindus and Indians. And if this is it's a tricky situation, because like it's not purely related to hate speech alone, because like their agenda is like very different. They have like other mandate as well.
Yeah.
But that's just a point that I wanted to add to it. Are
Yeah.
you done, Guru Vignesh?
Just one final point, okay? So today, in the world of digital, right, where we don't see one another, it is easy to say, anything bad just because I don't see you, right? That probably causes a lot of hate, So because if I'm talking in person, rather, I'm typing in some comments or so, right? That is easy for me to write any stupid thing, right? So probably like, that's why I feel like, more open debate, face-to-face debate among our leaders is also very important.
Yeah, no, we've seen that even here, with the debate club. What we are seeing is that because like text debates like are often like very problematic.
Correct.
But when it comes to voice debates, like I think people are much more civil over here. We've never had a situation where people have shouted at each other and like been openly disrespectful or anything. But in
Yeah.
text, even in our own text channels, like these things happen.
Yeah.
That people are very aggressive and all this.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks
Okay.
for sharing your views.
Thank you.
Who's next? Prince, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'll agree with all the speakers that has spoken before me, I guess, and rightly so. Text messages are a bit messy, but I'd like to substantiate what Mr. I guess Guru said, and the fact that there is no clear definition of hate speech kind of restricts freedom of speech even further than what it should have been. For example, what actually is hate speech? Is quoting hadith versus hate speech? Because we saw the Nupur Sharma case where there was immense violence in the entirety of India just because she quoted factually correct information from hadith, which was, according to the other community, hateful towards them. And I'm not targeting any specific community. I have many Vedic verses also, which I know if I quote as true as they might be, it will get me in trouble. So, is quoting these kind of, I'd say, embarrassing verses from the legitimate religious text considered hate speech? If it's so, then we are restricting speech to more than what it should have been. For example, I'll not name the guy; he does not deserve any publicity. A guy recently said while debating about the divine feminine of the Hindu community that you rape the girls you worship, and this according to me is a hate speech because there is no data, no information that uh, you are talking about in context of the divine feminine, and that to me is hate speech in comparison to some Vedic verses that may offend you much more than this. And I'm not inciting hate, I'm not inciting violence. Anyway, this is an old case. I don't think it's gonna re-emerge ever. So we need to actually look into the actual definition of what hate speech is. If quoting the religious texts is hate speech, then uh, at what point are we gonna stop? Then people can say that you referred to me as he instead of they. That offends me, and that comes under hate speech. So we need to kind of have a definite definition of what actually hate speech is, to make sure that our freedom of speech is not curtailed more than what it already is. Yeah.
Okay. Um, you know, so you're basically saying that hate speech is valid. I mean, like it is valid to categorize a certain speech as hate speech if it accompanies false speech as well.
Yes, if it has like no basis, or because if we just go by the definition of if it has offended you or not, then people can get offended by anything. We are seeing in the Western civilization that people are getting offended because they are not referred to as an attack helicopter.
Okay. So, but what if like I, like let's say that there is like, let's say that's a white guy and he keeps calling you like a darky or something like that. It's a factual thing that we're all dark, but does that constitute as not hate speech because it's factually correct?
And there is where I guess the nuances come in, because it's racism, but it's factually true as well. So I guess that is where the government needs to work.
No, I think to a certain extent, right? Like I'm just thinking that you can't place excessive control over speech. The moment you do that, right, then it kind of like erodes the necessity for people to engage in their own, like, civil common sense. So it is a very tricky situation because like you can't have excessive control, but you also cannot have like excessive, like immunity to detrimental speech. So
So
yeah.
just to clarify, the reason why I'm saying that hate speech needs to be defined so that people are also aware, and when this nuances comes in, then the government can quote anything you're saying as hate speech, and then you virtually have zero space to say anything. So that's why. Yeah, I guess my time is up.
Yeah, and I think there is also a room for us to discuss whether because the primary reason that people offer for the control of hate speech is that hate speech can lead to violence. Hate speech can lead to this, that. So what if, like, instead of like like categorizing it as hate speech, why not categorize it as like detrimental speech? Like how can if certain kind of speech is causing people to be violent, or certain speech is causing chaos in the society that is going to drain public resources in controlling that chaos, or any kind of like things that are attacking the mandate of the nation. As a nation, we all want to progress, we all want to develop, we all want to engage in judicial use of our resources. And if anything that comes in the way of that can be categorized as detrimental speech based on what kind of a consequences that speech has. And I think if that is a framework, then maybe it would be different. I'm just thinking out loud at this point, because like this is just something that I'm realizing as a matter of this conversation. But yeah, Sandeep, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would go to 100%. Would say you shouldn't label anything as hate speech. It is an extension of free speech when somebody would get offended and somebody would get hurt for something somebody said, right? And if that is going to be considered as hate speech, according to me, it is just foolishness. If I mean, as long as the correspondence between this labeling something as hate speech only limited to a fact that it is only verbal. You said something about somebody and they got offended. You say it's a hate speech, and it is now you're saying that this should be like some kind of an offense, which is, I think, it considers that it shouldn't be labeled as hate speech. Because let's say, for an example, if I go out and I hate somebody, right? It's human beings have emotions. You hate somebody, and I say something about a politician, I hate him. It doesn't matter if it is truth or not. Now you're telling me that I said something that I hated a politician, and then I will be prosecuted, which is stupid, right? That is freedom of speech. You expressed your, expressed your own anger or emotion, and then somebody would come in, like the same free speech will be used by someone else, and then they will counter your own argument and make the rest of the people understand, okay, whatever you said is wrong, but it is freedom of speech. If if you if you put everything under, like, okay, somebody get hurt and somebody don't like it, just imagine yourself in 1890s under the British rule. British would put all these kind of restrictions. You cannot say something that would align with yourself with fighting for your own freedom, right? So if you put yourself in such a place and then you talk about freedom of speech, then you'll understand how powerful, how suppressed you will feel, not able to speak your own mind. So, but again, if let's say, if you have to take an example that somebody is going out of their own way and provoking everybody to cause violence and cause disturbance to society, obviously there are judicial and judiciary will get into it, and they will be prosecuted accordingly. But if I just say something about somebody and it is considered as hate speech and it is like suppressed, that is stupid. I think somebody brought up something about Khalistan, right? Canada is not trying to stop people hating India. Somebody hate India, you hate some other country, so what? Let them hate and let them say whatever they want to say. They can speak their own mind. And now you say today, okay, they will speak about Khalistan, I don't want them to speak about it. That is, you're like, they could also say that I don't want this person to talk about like that because it is infringing on my own free speech. See, it doesn't make sense because you're claiming your own free speech and then you're asking someone to not to do that. So it doesn't matter, as long as anybody can say whatever they want, especially when the intention itself is not about causing violence, right? And again, a lot of people have brought up the points like, how do you understand, or how do you contemplate if something is going to cause violence or not? That is that is a little bit of gray area. It is not like too much. So we can leave it to the law enforcement to decide, okay, what are the potentials of it. I understand it will creep into a little bit into the free speech, but that is something you can compromise on some things, because you cannot have a perfect way of having a free speech. So that's it. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, so you're basically saying that if there is a pattern of free speech, which is like, for example, if somebody is like using hate to gather a community and do something with an intent, then that should be classified differently than
to cause violence intentionally so that it will deteriorate society, right? See, let's say I'll take an example. When I was in Delhi, people, North Indians would call me Madrasi, right? They're not trying to harm me. They have see, it could be racism, but so what? I wouldn't go and condemn them like, okay, this is hate speech, I want them to be executed. I wouldn't. Right? I never been to Madras, probably one or twice, but they call me Madrasi because I'm a South Indian. So what? So it is like, as you said, that's factual, right? They see South Indians as Madrasis, and if someone is black, they are black. Someone is white, they are white. That is a factual information. But even if I would go to an extent where even if there is a hatred towards certain group of people, they can express it. What is wrong with that? I don't know. I mean, you can say that morally wrong, you shouldn't do that. See, that is what the nature of human beings. If they shouldn't do that means, how am I supposed to say you shouldn't do that? And you're going to enforce something that is not going to cause any violence or harm to anybody. So it's a psychological thing, right? And you can also argue psychological damage is also damage, but that's the nature of the beast, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Sandeep. Yes, Samad, go ahead.
I would like to bring up, what might be considered as like somewhat of a distinct point by saying that freedom of speech, though it is very lionized these days, even that one is not like an unqualified good. So free speech can be good in some instances, but it cannot be an unqualified good. If people are, if Raghav, like you feel like that what I'm going to say is like is not part of the scope of the present debate, you can let me know. but I will go ahead and make my point. To give an to elaborate my point, I will start with the the family unit. Let's say like we have a family, and all of the members of the family, the discussion in that family, it can pertain to various matters. So open discussion is encouraged in various matters in that family. So members of that family can disagree about what the correct tax rate should be, or what is the best hobby to pursue. And these are all of the discussions that are engaged in that family. But then the family has like a taboo about not uttering blasphemous things. There should be no blasphemous things uttered with respect to any deity in that family. Is like the uh, you know uh, is like the rule in that family. And when anybody does that one, so that kind of speech, it is criticized. And if that person is persisting in uttering such blasphemous remarks, he will eventually be asked to leave that home and go somewhere else. So, why the intention behind doing behind establishing such a taboo on this blasphemous things is, according to the family, because it will decrease the reverence and the value that members in that family hold towards what they consider as a very important thing in this in their life. And what this blasphemous thing is doing is it degrades the reverence that the family members have towards that worldview. So that is why they are asking, you can have your freedom of speech, but not over here. You can go somewhere else, and there you can have your, your own freedom of speech. So now let's enlarge the scope a bit from this particular family to a particular religious community. So let's say we have like a housing colony, and it has like people from only certain religious community, and they have freedom of speech to engage in discussion about various matters. But even there is like some topics that is taboo, like how I said, the uttering blasphemous things. So I think even in their case, it might be justified for them to eventually exile some person who are not following the rules that they had set up, because of the reasons that they had given. Because this person who is creating, is just uttering, blasphemous things, he's going to degrade the condition. And so he will basically alter people's attitudes. He will alter people's lifestyle for the worse, according to the religious people living over there. So now let's extend the scope towards a nation. So, now what is a nation? We will get into a discussion about that one. Some people define nation as people who have, who follow a certain culture. There's a common set of values that are deriving from the underlying culture, and that culture, it fosters discussion and debate among various topics, but it prohibits discussion among some topics, because the thinking is if we going to allow discussion in these topics, it might lead to a situation where negative things are said, which will gradually undermine the foundations of that nation. So here, one can see, like from this way of thinking of freedom of speech, it does do harm to a society, and it is not an unqualified good. Yeah, so I'm nearly done with my speech. So freedom of speech, it can be a qualified good. It can be good in some instances, but it can be bad in many other instances too. Yeah, so that will be my speech for the time being.
Samarth, I see what you're saying, but the thing is that if you do something like that's in my opinion, that is like kind of like stupid, because like if you have like very set defined dogmas as to what a society should be, or what a country should be, or what even a family should be, then you're preventing that state to evolve, because evolution of the society or the things happen through evolution of the narrative. If you prohibit free speech, the essential loss is that you're losing the opportunity for things to evolve and become better. I mean, we've seen so many instances where, like, whatever we believe to be true, and if you allow free speech to happen, then it allows the scope for things to improve on the basis of that. If you prevent it, then you're basically like establishing an authoritarian situation where you're trying to preserve the status quo at any cost, even at the cost of preventing development or improvement in general. So that's just the thing that came to my mind. But yeah, Jayesh, go ahead. No,
Yeah, so I will answer at a later time because I want to allow other people to speak.
Sure,
Thank you.
Yeah. Jayesh, go ahead.
So I want to classify the hate speech into 3 categories. You can counter me afterwards. And I do think those 3 categories will be on an individual level, second on the community level, and the third on a national level. So on the individual level, it is very hard to implement laws on hate speech. I mean, what's good for me is bad for you, and vice versa. So I do think it's very, very difficult to implement it on an individual level. On a community level, we can monitor it. If somebody is quoting my religious text to me, it should not be considered as a hate speech. But if somebody is using foul language or just saying trash about the particular community, that should be considered under the hate speech. And on the national level, I do think that if some group of people or individual is trying to divide the country or try to invoke future violence in that country, it should be strictly monitored, and it should be a crime to speak such things against a particular country. It can be any country. So
Okay.
I want you guys to counter if I'm wrong.
Okay, so you're basically saying that the laws have to be different based on the size of the audience.
Yeah, on the severity of the hate speech.
No, but severity is controlled by several things. But what you're specifically, the distinctions that you've drawn is basically about the size of the people who are receiving that speech, right? If I as an individual, if I'm speaking something to somebody close to me or something like that, then the certain rules apply. And then if it's a community, then certain rules apply. If it's a national, then certain rules apply. So you're talking about the size of the audience who are receiving that speech, right?
Right.
Okay, so that means that we are basically talking about different rules for broadcast systems, because the only way that you can speak to everybody in the nation is through a broadcast system, either through online, like you're broadcasting yourself on an online platform, or you're some kind of using some kind of a technology to enhance your the reach of your speech. And I think that does that does make sense to me, because a lot of these like free speech things have come to play because of the nature of the society that we live in right now, where things are all enhanced, and everything, anything that you say can be like heard by millions of people. And I think that rules of engagement have changed compared to like maybe like 50 years ago, when you could not reach that many people and things didn't matter so much as to what you spoke. Because if you say something, it's likely that the people who are closest to you are the only ones listening to you, and it's probably the case that they all in some way agree with you, because it usually tends to be the case that people are of a certain region are mostly aligned. But even if it is not, if let's say that somebody, for example, somebody came and said that the earth is not flat, and the vast majority of people believe that that is like absurd, that they believe that the earth is flat, then they are going to want to punish that person because it goes against whatever they believe. So I think maybe we've reached a point where we have to fundamentally redefine the how we perceive speech, because like the consequences of speech have significantly been altered because of the changes that have happened in our communication systems in the past, like 10-15 years even. That does make a lot of sense to me. But yeah, Samarth, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. like the rebuttal given was how even establishing taboos and saying that some topics are beyond discussion, some topics are off limits to discussion, how that might create a authoritarian environment. So that is a good point to make. So the rebuttal against that would be any society to function, it should have a framework or some foundation, which would consist of certain rules which must not be questioned, or some certain set of rules which every member of that society should agree upon. And then we can leave the other topics which does not fall into this foundation of rules. So the other things, it can be discussed upon and some consensus reached. So I think every society on earth that has existed so far, and every society on earth which exists at this present time, every society, it does follow this rule. Because take any country, for example. In that country, there will be some rules at the very foundational level, which they consider it as very fundamental to the functioning of that society, such as murder is immoral and it should be prosecuted, rape is immoral and that should be prosecuted. Whereas they're going to leave up for discussion some other rules, such as what is the correct tax rate to be agreed upon, and all of this, the various economic policy and various other cultural stuff, they are willing to debate upon and come to some sort of consensus, whether through democratic or some other means. So given this fact that every society, it does function on some set of assumptions, and then we have other policies which or we have some other views which can be debated upon. The only question is not whether those fundamental rules should exist. The question is to what extent does that fundamental rules cover. So should that fundamental rules should cover very basic things such as murder is wrong or rape is wrong, or it should contain even a broadened view of topics such as what is considered as blasphemous or not. So therein lies the discussion. This set of assumptions that a society is built upon, how broad it should be or how narrow it should be, and what is the pros and cons of each situation. If we have a more broad set of assumptions, such a society, will it foster an environment where innovation cannot take place because the debate is stifled? So we can have a discussion about that one, and then we can have a discussion about if a society has very less number of set assumptions, that will lead to a society probably where it will lead to more innovation. But then that is also society where people they are disagreeing about everything and fighting about everything, that causes chaos in the society, and that will lead to problems of its own. So that is what I would say, and I would definitely not axiomatically, I would not agree to the point that any set of fundamental assumptions, if a society clings to that one, it is it axiomatically means that it will lead to an authoritarian society. Because as I said, such a set of assumptions is necessary for any functioning society. Yeah, thank you.
Somewhat the ironic thing about what you just said is that the only society where that conversation can even happen as to what are acceptable and what are non-negotiable, that can only happen in a society where free speech exists without any holds. So what you're saying assumes that you're living in a society where that can happen, and only then we can actually come to the agreement on these things.
Right. I get what you're saying. Even the discussion about what what are the topics to be included in that set of like assumptions which are not to be questioned or not. So even the discussion to take place, like everyone must agree to that no topic is beyond
Yeah.
discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, one can definitely follow that axiom and create a society based on that one and see where that leads to. Or else like one can define build a society where they're going to say here for our society to function, we're going to say that these 3 number of rules or 5 number of rules, those are like completely like off topic and not there for discussion. Whereas the other topics, they're open for discussion. We can have that kind of a society and see where that leads to. And
Yeah.
which society like flourishes over like, let's say 10 years, 100 years, 1000 years. That is, I would say it's not like a settled question at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is like a topic for probably a different day. But yeah, I get your point. Like, for such a like open discussion to happen, that rule must be there that no topics is off bounds. But then the question would be like, what is the most important priority for any human being? Is it to, well, maybe some would say that the most important thing in my life is, let's say, like to have the most flourishing life, and that necessarily entails, saying that some topics are necessarily off bounds, and we're going to create such a society, or someone might have a view like what you expressed very clearly. Someone else might have a view, and then we can compare like society built upon each of this one, how it will be, over like an extended period of time. So that is like an open and unsettled question. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Saju, go ahead.
So hate speech has been researched well online, and there is quite a number of resources available classifying hate speech into various categories. There is a website called SSRC, US based, which categorizes hate speech into 3 categories, primarily being, I forgot the categories. It's derogative or leading to conclusions, and the third one is trying to do inflammatory speech to hurt people. So I think there is an angle of misinformation and disinformation also in case of hate speech, which is quite devastating. That is, the effects are quite devastating. Somebody does a misinformation, it's usually to bring harm to a group of people or a person or individual. So I think you all would have discussed various ways to prevent it. There are usually some bad actors in the society who has a propaganda or who has a different intent and wants to, divide the people or to cause harm to the society by making people hate each other. For those things, hate speech is used. Nobody uses the opposite of hate speech is. I haven't actually come across a proper definition of what should be considered as opposite of hate speech. So Raghav, you have any discussion done on that? I joined a bit late. No, right?
I mean, opposite of hate speech is just confirmational speech. Like, you're just conforming to whatever people think. And, we've talked about, like, the intersection between hate speech and false speech and all these things. But we haven't really talked about the opposite of hate speech or anything.
Yeah, so there is. I also tried to research that, and I found there is actually nobody who has thought in that way. What should be the opposite of hate speech? So if you consider free speech as an umbrella term, under which, let's say, hate speech is a part of it, like an effect that happens. So what is the other effect that happens that is opposite of hate speech that I don't know?
No, so why is it important to discuss the opposite of hate speech? I don't understand the relevance of it.
Because I'm trying to classify hate speech into like, if you consider, see, by nature, free speech is what is fundamental in nature. Everybody has got 100% free speech. That is the fundamental thing in nature. And if you consider all the other types of speech that come under this umbrella term of free speech, then we have to define what is hate speech, that we are already doing. What is the other type of speech that is not hate speech? So if we call it quote unquote not hate speech, then it will have a certain characteristics, right? So hate speech is also using the same characteristics of what we call as free speech. Because if you consider a society to be truly free, then hate speech is also part of it. Like, for example, if you don't like someone, then rather than getting into the details of why you don't like someone, you just abuse or hurl abuses at that person, right? And that is considered to be hate speech, but it is also free speech. So
hate speech and free speech are not like mutually exclusive, you know, like it's not like if it is hate speech, they're just like, it doesn't matter whether hate speech is, you know, obviously it is free speech. Free speech is just like, it's like a term to describe the ability to speak freely. But hate speech is the speech that is an expression of hate. So these two are not really like, you know, mutually exhaustive categories. It's like you don't need to, like, you know, think about the opposite of hate speech. I
exactly.
Still see that. Yeah.
I agree. So I also consider hate speech is a part of free speech, if we consider free speech as an umbrella term. So it's all emotional. So hate speech talks about hatred and the emotions and representing emotions that come from hatred. Love speech talks about speech that we do that comes from love and affection. Similarly, there are many emotions, right? So I think hate speech is it just to express the emotion of hatred that one person has to other person, or one community has to other community, or something.
Yeah, and it has detrimental effects. It has some detrimental effects. That's the reason why hate speech is like frowned upon, because like when the moment you express your hatred, it causes, like, you know, like a domino effect of like other people doing the same, and it eventually leads to violence, which is the thing that we, you know, that people who are proponents of curbs over hate speech are trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid a situation where hate speech leads to this kind of a domino effect of chaos and violence that is going to be costly for all of us. We don't want to live in a society.
Okay, I want to address that in my next part. So hate speech is not contagious, just like affectionate speech is not contagious. Like, if you have a hatred to someone and you speak loudly about that hatred, it is not contagious. It only spreads because other people also have similar emotions. Same as the love speech, right? It is not contagious. If you express your love for someone or some concept or idea, it will only spread if the others also feel it.
Yeah, you're saying that it's conditionally contagious.
Yeah. So same case for hate speech. If a hate speech is spreading, then it actually shows that there is some other problem, underlying problem in the society.
Yeah,
so it is a very good indicator of what is happening.
So you're saying that it's not a causal thing. It is something that is more of a, you know, correlated event. Hate speech doesn't automatically. Okay.
Yeah, symptom. It's a symptom. Yeah, that's what I am thinking. Yeah. Right. I would like to end here, Raghav. Okay. And thanks. I like the timer, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Samarth, go ahead. I'm not sure if you've previously raised a hand, or did you have more to say, Samarth?
Oh, I had raised my hand mistakenly.
Okay. All right. We are getting to the point where we usually end this at 12:30 for the moderated session, and then up 12:30 we just have like free flowing session where anybody can speak up and we have like a free flowing discussion around this topic. And I see that some of the people who joined in the beginning, they kind of dropped off, but some of the other ones are still here. I really hope that you guys will consider like joining back again for the next session as well. But I want to just like educate you about the way we conduct these events. So 11 to 12:30 is the moderated session, and then after 12:30 we just leave it open, and anybody can speak. So I see that nobody is raising their hand. Anything else that people would like to add? Yes, Sandeep, go
Raghav,
ahead.
can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that example you made about flat Earth? I couldn't quite get it.
I just said that if let's say that everybody thinks that the Earth is flat, and suddenly somebody is coming and saying that the Earth is not flat, it's oval. Now they will look at this person as being somebody who's inciting chaos or anarchy in society, or they're trying to challenge the structure and the order of society, and that's what's happened. So that's why I see any kind of like holds placed on free speech to be a detrimental thing for evolution of the society, because it
Exactly.
prevents the evolution of the narrative.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, and considering that we don't have any other people like raising their hand, I think we can just like make this be, we can just moderate, like, open, let this be the open discussion form. So anybody can raise their hand. I mean, and anybody can unmute and speak. So Samarth, go ahead.
Right. So one thing could be done, no? Like the Raghav, the point that you brought up, like how in some cases the person bringing a new idea to a society, it might be considered as creating chaos in that society, and how that person will be, like exiled from that society, or he'll be basically asked to keep his mouth shut. The antidote that you said was like just to keep none of the topics off bounds. So rather than that one, what we could have is like that person who has like a new and revolutionary worldview. He can go and set up his own society and encourage people with the similar worldview to come and build their society with him, rather than trying to transform the society that is currently existing in from the ground up, and where he wants to like uproot all of the established each and every instead of like trying to uproot each and every one of the established traditions in that society, and the other members of the society have made it clear that certain topics are really off bounds, or his view on some topics, when they made it quite clear that is not acceptable, that other person who feels like shunned, he can go and establish his own society, and probably there he can build a society where nothing is off bounds, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, like you might as well like colonize another planet as well along the way, because like whatever you're saying, right, that constitutes as like a very resource intensive expensive operation. I mean, like we all have like limited lifespans. Instead of like this person getting what they want, if they have the overhead of like having to establish a separate society and create a thing, I mean, obviously that thing is open for anybody to do, right? I mean, I could say that about like, even for example, let's say that I take away all of your money from your bank account. You can, and you're protesting that. Instead of protesting me, why don't you just go ahead and establish your own society and economy and culture and nation and army and everything, right? It's like it's a disproportionate response to something as simple as like allowing people to do something. If a large enough number of people are feeling the same way, you can't expect all of them to go and like establish their own society. And so changing the existing rules is a much more economically sensible act than going and establishing new societies, right?
So what I would say to that one, if that person who has like the revolutionary ideas, and if there are like large number of enough people with whom has like resonance with those ideas. If a large number of people they feel resonance with these ideas, those large number of people will be sufficient to go and form a new society and establish all of these things. Whether it's like establishing food production industry and all of the rest of the things that are required to have a functioning society. So
Yeah.
if he's not able to do that one, what it shows is he's just a loner in the society, and his ideas does not have resonance in the society, and it just goes to show that he's like just misusing the freedom that he's being given to sow chaos in the society. That is what it shows basically.
Yeah, exactly. So the same thing that I said, right? Like in terms of like what is economically sensible, instead of like changing the entire society for one person's requirements or needs, you just like ask them to either adjust or like leave. That is what we can say. Instead of like asking them to set up their own, that's up to them. As to whether they go ahead and do that or not is up to them. But yeah, I think the general principle applies that you need to do something whatever is like economically sensible. Even for example, I'll give a concrete example. A lot of the times, like I felt like a lot of the things that happen in India don't make sense, and I don't see enough other people complaining about it. And it seems like I'm the only one complaining about things. So a lot of the times I felt like the need to say that, okay, you know what, maybe I'm the problem. And instead of like changing this country, I might just like leave and go find somewhere else that makes more sense. And I've thought about that, genuinely thought about that for a long time. But I also realized that unless you actually like, start talking about the things that you want to be done, you will not discover the other people who also feel the same way. So this hypothetical situation where you're the only person is often not the case. A lot of the times the things that you are sensing are also things that other people sense, but maybe it's just not done so out in the open because of the fact that like people don't openly speak about it. So that's where again the free speech actually comes into play, because like it allows you to discover the other people who also feel the same way. If you don't have that free speech provision, you will never discover that, and you will all like independently try to go and like set up your own society or something like that, which would be economically much more disastrous. I'm not just like when I say economically disaster, I'm not talking about the country's economy. I'm talking about like from a resource perspective.
Correct. Yeah, you made a very valid point there. Like, how can we actually know whether if I hold a view, how many other people they hold a similar view to me if there is no provision for free speech? So yeah, so I think that's a good point, and I can't think of anything right now to answer to that.
No, yeah, because like I've actually the reason why I'm making that point is because it's a real thing in my life. Because for a long time I thought that I was alone, but the truth is that it's not the case. A lot of people are like closet proponents of a certain perspective. But I'm getting a call. Give me a sec.
Okay, I think I'll talk. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So I think everything has a cause, and if you talk about free speech and under that hate speech has a cause. And similarly, if I can coin the term non-hate speech or love speech, even love speech also has a cause, right? It's an emotional cause. If I am, as a society, we are all staying together, and I am a non-vegetarian, and I have this immense pleasure in eating mutton, and I cook mutton in my home, and the fragrance of that mutton goes into that cooking mutton goes into my neighbor's house, and in my neighbor's house that very fragrance is considered as a smell, and the neighbor will think that why should I go and complain to Mr. Sajus, because he might feel bad. So over a period of time, he himself censors, he does a self-censor of his emotions, and there is no forum given to him to express his thoughts, that whatever I'm doing is causing discomfort to him. And over a period of time, the hate builds up, and ultimately, at one day, with given the right circumstances, hate speech will come out of his mind. And this happens because people in our society are not able to express their feelings to each other. So that's when, and because that free speech was not allowed in the first place, it has ultimately boiled down and become a hate speech. So I feel lack of free speech is what causes hate speech at after a certain period of time. Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, I guess just to add, I do agree with both Raghav's and Samat's point of view, and I do get why do they think so, but uh, it is the same thing what happened to Galileo when he, kind of challenged the biblical idea that Earth is at the center of the universe and the heavens, and he brought up the idea of heliocentrism. Then he was executed. He was uh, not hanged, but he was killed. And this kind of shows that if we are going to impose these kind of restrictions, then there is going to be virtually no scientific development, and we are going to go into an age of darkness. Because I guess Samarth pointed out that it is more economically viable for the said person, in this case, let's say Galileo, to go and start a new society where people who, kind of agree with his beliefs can go in and, let's say, make up a new society. Now, first of all, in the current day and age, I don't think there is any place in the world that we have not colonized, except maybe Antarctica, uh, which half of the year is not even livable. And secondly, let's say Raghav came up with a theory, and I individually am very impressed with the idea that Raghav has. But that is not an incentive enough for me to leave my whole family, my siblings, my relatives, and go in and start a new life, getting rid of all of my connections here, all of my whole, I can't uproot my life and go in and start a new society because I think there is a new idea that is true. I don't think people are going to do that. And this idea that Raghav has, that he believes that he points out to issues that mostly none of the people do. And this also happened with, I guess, Dr. Ambedkar, because we can easily see through the election data that he was not a very he was not a popular leader. He lost majority of the elections he fought. So it does not mean that the ideas that he had of abolition of untouchability and things like that were not good or beneficial to the society. It's we need to kind of accommodate these kind of opinions, differing opinions in the same culture to, kind of make sure that the society kind of progresses. Yeah, sorry, Raghav.
Can you guys hear me now? Yeah, so this whole notion of like leaving a society and going and starting a new society, that doesn't apply anymore. You don't have to leave everything and go start a new society. You can just what I've done here is basically that we've created a society here. The debate club is a society in a sense, because here we are coming in, we're able to do certain things that we're not able to do in our immediate environment. So in the modern context, people can create their own underground societies or like subcultures where certain behaviors are accepted. There are these things do happen, There are like, for example, there are like BDSM communities where normal things that are, whatever they think should be allowed are not allowed in the immediate surroundings. So they gather together as people who are aligned in a certain vision so that they can practice things that seem bizarre to others. So you don't have to leave your society. You just have to like go find the people, and then you can form a community where you can do those things. And that's what happens most often. It's not that it's only like, for example, in if you take Afghanistan as an example, right? They are over there. They introduced the new rule saying that women are not allowed to pray aloud, or women are not allowed to be seen by themselves. There are all these other restrictions. So they create their own sub communities, but even those are attacked. Okay, so this is the concern we have. You can create like underground communities within your existing communities, but yeah, like there is no question of like you going and creating separate civilizations just to express your free speech. I think that is only an option if like your entire, like you're fundamentally threatened. But most of us, we don't face that kind of like a dilemma,
Raghav, we are sitting here in this community because our nation allows it. Our nation can very well prevent this community, that is you and me talking together on this forum, if it wants to. And it has happened in our nation before. And we have worked around it. Our freedom fighters worked around it and found ways to talk to each other, radio, newspaper, things like that. But we are already free, and our freedom fighters value this meaning of free speech, right? Even today in our society, there is hatred, but we are talking to each other. There is a hatred in various sections in our society, manufactured hatred, artificial hatred, or otherwise. I'm not sure. That's a different debate. But we are talking to each other. And this is something I feel we should cherish. We can talk like this on a platform with each other, open our minds, and there won't be a police standing at my doorstep the next day. That is a privilege, I would say.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you had any kind of like laws that prohibit this kind of a gathering, right, it would be very, very difficult to enforce. And let's say that they go against it and still enforce it, then you have like a couple of options. You don't have to leave and go. You can still fight them. That is actually the reason why I really appreciate the America's like Second Amendment rights, where they have the right to bear arms, which means that they can actually fight the government. If the government becomes so authoritarian that they are actually going against your fundamental rights, you can actually fight the government with your own weapons. Obviously, the government has like a much bigger weapons, and they can maybe like even drop missiles on your house, and you won't be able to do anything. But you can fight against cops building weapons at your door. So I think that it makes sense in America that they have these things to prevent your rights from being taken away. So I think I'm not saying that we should have similar things in India. I think already like we have like a lot of people who abuse their freedom. If you have the right to bear arms like freely, I'm pretty sure like we'll descend into chaos because we don't have the maturity. A lot of people, even the whole free speech thing, right? The reason why free speech needs to be restricted to a certain extent is because people don't have the maturity to handle free speech. Like if somebody else speaks freely, they get enraged and they get emotionally volatile, and they inadvertently cause like damage. So that's where it kind of like makes sense. Even though I would like to call myself a free speech absolutist, but practically it doesn't make sense when a society is not evolved enough to handle that freedom. So I'm just saying that there are two options. You can either like leave and join your own create your own civilization, or you can go and fight it and take power, take charge. Which is what we did with the British. If you're talking about the British coming in, enforcing those rules, and the freedom fighters took it, what they did was not to leave and go somewhere else and find this thing. They actually fought back, right?
Right. To
That was
further
a choice.
this discussion, I'll add one point about how we talked about how the very fact that we are having this conversation, it could take place in a free society, like the kind we are living in. I would just add one more fact to this one. The fact that the society that we live in, they are allowing us to have this conversation is because we are not engaging in any conversation that they consider as out of bounds. We are having conversation in relatively innocuous topics. What the society, what the government consider as relatively innocuous. That is the only reason why they're allowing even this conversation to happen. If this conversation took some other turn and we started to discuss about how we like to harm animals for our own pleasure, and then we started to discuss about plans, to how to actually achieve that one, or to talk about harming minor people, doing that kind of sick kind of stuff. That speech, it will again be considered as illegal, and the authorities will be ready to clamp down upon that one. So, which brings us to the fact that even now some kind of speech are already restricted.
Yeah, but
and actually the government is actually correct in restricting that kind of speech, and it can say that if you really want to have that kind of speech, open speech, maybe you should go and establish your own society, is what they would say, the government.
yeah. So, in that case, right, like, see, you can't enforce people from speaking. You can only enforce people from publishing that speech. Because if you and I gather in a private room and we have this speech, they wouldn't even know. They wouldn't be able to enforce that speech. It's only when it comes to expressing publicly, or broadcasting or publishing your opinions, that is where they can control things, right? I would say that we still have free speech,
Correct.
but doing it publicly is what makes it enforceable to those laws. So that's what I meant when I said us gathering here and talking about this. It's only if they know about it, then they can come and control this. But if we can do it in a way that is closed group, then they can't do anything.
Right. Yeah. So I get what you're saying. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So like a cult kind of thing, right? Where we are kind of exercising our freedom of speech, but we are making sure that the government does not get to know what we are discussing behind the closed doors.
Yeah, I think one distinction that we fail to draw when it comes to freedom of speech is that freedom of speech and then freedom to broadcast your speech. These are two different things. That's why I said that we have reached a state where these things need a fundamental readdressal, because what is considered as speech is different from me speaking into a microphone in a YouTube video or something, because the consequences of that speech are very, very different. If I sit here in my private bedroom and say anything, it doesn't matter. But if I say this, say same thing out in the public, it has consequences. And that's why I was indicating that we need to look at instead of looking at hate speech, we need to look at detrimental speech that is causing detrimental consequences. I think we need to redefine the laws to look at the consequences of speech, because even if somebody is saying something that is not hateful, they could have a detrimental effect on society based on what they're saying. For example, if Amitabh Bachchan promoting gutka and tobacco products, that is detrimental. I would actually say that this is going to have that's a reason why there is backlash when they say these things. Because it is actually causing a lot of large scale shift in public behavior as a matter of your speech. So your speech has consequences. So it is because of the consequences that your speech is restricted. And that is where we need to draw the distinction. It's not about hate or love or whatever else it is. It's more about is the consequences of your speech detrimental or are they productive? And if it is causing detrimental effects, which consumes public resources in restoring those detrimental effects, then it is in our best interest to prevent such kind of speech from happening, right?
So that brings to another question, whether the consequences, of such a detrimental speech should it be enforced by the government, or should like a group of individuals, try to punish the person for the bad consequences of that detrimental speech.
When you say group of people, are you talking, I mean, that constitutes like vigilantes, I don't think that would ever be, advocated by anybody. I think my personal perspective is that like you can't have excessive control, top-down control by the government, but at the same time you can't give license to vigilante groups or something like that. I think the bottom line, right? If you take a step back and look at this from a very big picture, I think the bottom line is how evolved the society is. If you have a really evolved society, then you don't need excessive barriers and excessive control, excessive anything. And the evolution of a society depends on the large scale evolution of the individuals in the society. And that can only happen through free speech and free expression. Because even if what you're saying is constituting a detrimental effect, and you're genuinely trying to do something good, and it has like inadvertent negative consequences, if you keep punishing that, right, that is going to prohibit people from expressing themselves and therefore from evolving. So I think at that point, right, if your prohibition of free speech is causing excessive detrimental effects, then it becomes you have to do an economic evaluation as to what is worse. Do you want to prevent this 0.5% detrimental consequence, or do you want to stall any kind of progression from happening to prevent that 0.5%? Right. So that's why I'm very against excessive control. I think that small mistakes need to happen. I mean, even if you're raising a child, that child could be doing small mistakes here and there. That's how they learn. But if you prohibit them from doing those small things, then you're raising a sheltered child who is forever going to be a child, because you prohibit them from having any kind of life experience. So it's a very complex issue. That's why I'm against excessive control, because at the cost of preventing small mistakes, you're actually festering an environment where any kind of progress would be stalled.
According to me,
Yeah,
if
well
by
said, Raghav.
government you mean, if by government you mean judiciary, then I would say yes, judiciary should have a control over it, because judiciary can look into every aspect that Raghav just mentioned and not just look into it through an executive lens, which just follows orders or rules that are made by the legislature.
Well, I think the judicial system, I mean, that's a topic for another debate, actually. Our Indian society has had a culture of arbitration at the local levels. If there's a fight in your society, there is some elder in the society who will come and do arbitration, right? And try to pacify or settle the people. The judiciary, of course, you can debate on whether we can have a new system in which the judiciary can reach down to that, but that's a different topic altogether. I believe hate speech is, as Raghav said, it is like some mistakes must be made, and there has to be some, I mean, it cannot be hunky-dory all the time in the society. There has to be free speech. People should be allowed to speak their minds. And there are some elements in the society who just exploit it for their nefarious motives. Like, for example, Brexit happened. For example, the minuscule immigration problem was exploited using free speech in the US elections. And for example, the Hindu-Muslim thing that is going on in India. All these are hate speeches. But it cannot be disallowed. I felt there has to be someone who can come up with a better narrative to defeat it and explain to people the truth and things like that.
By the way, what is this Vimal universe? What is this?
It's like a joke where a lot of Bollywood people are going around advertising Vimal.
Advertising whom? Oh, Vimal.
Vimal
the
is
brand,
like a
the brand.
tobacco.
Okay. Got it. Oh, by the way, like thanks for reminding me about the Wednesday brainstorming topic. So, every Wednesday we have these like brainstorming sessions where we come together to have like actionable discussions. Where the goal is to like come up with an actionable proposal instead of just like having these like exchange of perspectives. So every month we choose a topic and we have 4 sessions on it, 4 Wednesdays per month. So four sessions where we discuss that topic. So the topic for this discussion this month is how do we redefine the law enforcement and judicial system in India? And we've had a very, very interesting first session last week, and we're gonna have our second session this Wednesday at 7 p.m. So I would really encourage any of you interested in following up with the discussion to join in at 7 p.m. on Wednesday. So we'll post the link in the WhatsApp group just like we did today, and we'll have a discussion on how we actually improve the law enforcement and judicial system in India. So please join into that. But yeah, we can continue this conversation. I just want to remind you guys.
Yeah, so the point that came up earlier that we should actually redefine hate speech in respect to what we are, the speech when we are not broadcasting our conversation and the speech when it's publicly broadcasted. Because when hate speech publicly broadcasted, that could lead to, let's say, violence at a greater scale as compared to even if you are speaking hate speech in closed doors. I don't think anybody really cares what you say behind the doors.
So I see that a lot of people have not really said anything. For example, Mahadev and I think I guess Mahadev is the only person who hasn't really spoken anything. Do you have any thoughts, Mahadev? Like, what is your experience of this session?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was carried away. I have been into session since last 10 minutes, I think so. Mm.
Okay, no worries.
So it's about hate speech, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex topic. I don't want to summarize the past 2 hours in this 5 minutes for you. But yeah, we're just like having a discourse on where do we draw the line about hate speech and how do we look at it. But I also want to hear from other people for whom this is the first time that you've joined this session. What has your experience been of this session? And because I want to have like some feedback about how we conduct our sessions and also like how we can improve things. So some of you are this is the first time. Right? I would love to hear your thoughts. Wow, everybody is like very quiet now.
No, I was just researching on this, Raghav. So sorry, I wanted to speak certain things. This is actually a lot of people are researching on hate speech and how to deal with hate speech in many countries. And I mean, it's basically like social science, right? Social related to society groups and all that. So we can get to know more about the whys and how to handle things like that when we actually conduct some experiments and find out what is going through people's minds. So if, let's say, somebody is there who is doing a lot of hate speech and we ask them the why questions, right? Then we'll come to know, or where is that. In India, it's very easy to do. All you have to do is get in touch with someone who hates the Muslims, and you will see. You can peel off the layers and find out where the root cause is. These are experiences we can actually do sitting here in India.
Yeah. Looks like nobody has anything else to say. So, do we close it here or?
Just
So
to
Raghu,
add,
okay, continue.
yes, sir.
Yeah, Jayesh, go ahead. You were saying something.
So I had to ask you that the next week's Wednesday topic about laws and judiciary, is it a general topic, or are you gonna ask? Are we gonna speak about a specific law?
No, it's a general, like, we're trying to optimize the way things work in the law enforcement and judicial systems. So it's more of an interactive session where we all come and contribute to the problem statement and how do we solve this problem. So it's a brainstorming session.
All right.
Yeah. Prince, you were saying something?
I guess I forgot. I'll add my name.
Okay. Okay, so I
Yeah, I think
actually,
we can end.
yeah, we can
If
end here, right?
nobody
Yeah.
else has anything to say.
Yeah, I think we've had a very productive session and we've had like a lot of exchange. Even it's giving me some food for thought about like some of these things. So I really enjoyed the session. Thanks for joining, everyone. So hope to see you in this Wednesday session as well as the next week sessions. So enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thank
Raghu.
you.
Bye, everyone. Great session.
Yeah.